If you're looking for information on backcountry wildlife photography, this is the place. Hello and welcome if you're new here, and welcome back if you're not. This is episode number 106. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan, and I'm a nature and wildlife photographer. Today, I'm excited to bring you an interview with wildlife and adventure photographer, Jimmy Breitenstein. He does solo wildlife photography trips into the backcountry of Yellowstone, Alaska, and his native Utah, as well as other regions of the West. Stay tuned for info about and photos of his backcountry adventures. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
My pleasure. So how did you get started in wildlife photography?
Well, that started long time before I ever picked up a camera. When I was just little, we're talking 6, 7 years old, I would watch PBS Nature when I could watch a show. That was what I always picked. And I was absolutely fascinated with the animals I would see. And I would love to see the behind the scenes stuff of those filmmakers and photographers, just always fascinated with that. The books I would get at the library were nature books about animals and different ecosystems. It's just always fascinated me. And then when I was 9 years old, what I wanted for Christmas was a camera so I could document my own wildlife sightings. And my dad graciously got me just a cheap little film camera. And I'd go around not knowing what I was doing, taking pictures of deer and raccoons and turkeys and things like that. And finally, about 5 years ago, I decided that, if I was going to be going out with the camera, I should probably know what I was doing. So that's when I really started looking at how to take better pictures and learn about photography. I learn about the settings of the camera. So that's when I really started going out actively trying to capture decent wildlife images. Was about 5 years ago. But yeah, everything stemmed from just a deep love for nature and wildlife.
You seem to be very much at home in the mountains and the wilderness. I assume that's because you grew up with it, huh?
Yeah, I love the mountains and the wilderness. I love just getting out on top of a mountain and spending time out there. And I've done a lot of training in bushcraft, survival skills, things like that. So I just love getting out into nature, and just that's where I feel at home, honestly, is out in nature.
Yeah, you seem to like to go off the beaten path in search of your wildlife photos as opposed to going to the usual places.
I sure do. I've done my fair share of both, but yes, I much prefer the backcountry over the main roads and whatnot of national parks and such like that.
So the conventional wisdom is that it's harder to find wildlife in the backcountry because they're not used to people. And how does that impact you?
It's
or
tricky.
Does it?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, or does it?
It sure does. It's very tricky. Once you head into the backcountry, those animals aren't generally tolerant of you. It's interesting because for the most part, they're not tolerant, but there are some animals that just get curious. They're probably thinking, what is this two-legged thing doing back here? And sometimes they'll come closer. But for the most part, like you said, it can get very hard in the backcountry photographing wildlife. And anytime I go, off the beaten path, I go with the expectation of not getting any images. And that's a lot of time how it goes for me. I don't get any pictures because I'm unable to get, close enough to an animal before it knows that I'm there. It gets very hard in the backcountry, and you cover a lot less ground than the conventional method, like you said, of photography, of maybe driving a road in a national park or something. So your opportunities for spotting wildlife can be very few and in between as well.
You seem to enjoy that challenge.
Oh, I love the challenge. And again, like I said, I go back there with the expectation of not getting any pictures. And I'm okay with that for the solitude that I get from it. And just the more deep connection I feel with nature, the intimate experiences you can have with wildlife in the backcountry, I'm totally okay with not getting pictures most of the time. It's well worth it for me.
So how do you stay safe in the backcountry when you're going out by yourself? And
safety starts with education and research and practice. Education being very important. So before I go out into a new area, I always look at the terrain on a map. I always check what the weather is going to be like to make sure I've got appropriate clothing and covering for my gear, different things like that. Like I mentioned before, I'm pretty familiar with I don't know what you want to call it, bushcraft, I guess. I know how to orient myself in different terrain. I know how to do basic first aid, find food and water. And so a lot of it has just come down to education and researching the animals in the area, their behaviors, what to look for, and just knowing what I'm getting into, I guess.
sure.
And a big thing of that as well is I found you can't be overconfident in the backcountry, especially when you're by yourself. If you get overconfident or cocky, you're going to get into trouble because you'll put yourself in a scenario that you'll be certain you can get yourself out of. And sometimes it might be very dangerous. So you got to kind of step back when you go into the backcountry, even if you're confident, oh yeah, I could scale that mountainside. You might want to find a different way up or something. Just be smart when you're out there and do your research, get your practice in a safe scenario. That way you're ready to go when you get into a little bit of the more extreme stuff.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like all good recommendations and good sense. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is shooting from a blind, and you do that both on land and water. Tell me how you go about doing that.
So shooting from a blind can be pretty tricky. I really like it for the backcountry wildlife because if you do it right, the animal doesn't know you're there. If you set up your blind appropriately and in the right spot, you can get some really close-up pictures of some animals or species that you probably wouldn't be able to photograph otherwise. And I've had quite a bit of success using blinds. Again, like I said, you need to do your research about where to set it up. You need to observe the species before you ever set the blind up to see where they're frequenting, and observe your terrain so you can get the background that you want. Where's the sun going to be when you photograph that animal? And that will all determine where you set that blind up and how you use it, basically. While using a blind, though, again, you have to go out with that expectation of, I might not get any pictures using this blind because the world is huge. You set a blind up one spot. What are the chances that an animal is going to go right where you want it to? And you'll get that picture. It can be pretty tricky, but you can increase the probability of getting something if you do the research, observe the animal before you ever set a blind up, and kind of know the species that you're after. Are they frequenting a specific area during that time? What time of day are you most likely to see them? And so on. So again, a lot of it comes down to researching and just exploring and getting to know the animal that you want to photograph.
So when you say research, what are you researching?
So for instance, let's say grouse. I was out last week with a couple different species of grouse and using a blind to photograph them. So researching, if it's a species of grouse that you've never photographed before, what kind of habitat are they in? You need to know where to look to find that animal. And, with a lot of grouse, they frequent very specific areas year after year. So where are you going to set that blind up so you're not interrupting the display that the grouse are doing? You're not getting in the middle of what they're doing. So when I say researching, it's location, species, how to best photograph that species in an ethical manner so you're not bothering them or disrupting them in any way. That's really what I mean when I say research.
Okay. With the blind, can you get closer to a species than without one?
I think it depends on the species. We had talked a little bit about the conventional method of photography. So Yellowstone, for example, or some of the national parks, you can drive through those parks and get pretty close to animals just by driving in your car or pulling out on the side of the road. And you wouldn't need a blind in that scenario, but you get other species that tend to be a little bit more wary of you stalking around or vehicles or whatnot. So the grouse that I was just talking about, for instance, there's some areas where you can pull up and get some pretty decent pictures from your vehicle, but if you can find a spot to set up a blind, you can get a lot closer than you would otherwise, or a fox den in the backcountry or something. You're going to need a blind to photograph something like that, because if the parents know you're there, they'll take off, and you don't want to bother the family. So it really depends on the species, I think, to answer your question. Some scenarios or species, you can get a lot closer using a blind than you would otherwise. Whereas other species, you can go to pull out in Yellowstone and get a lot closer than you might by using a blind.
Okay. Speaking of Yellowstone, I've been there in the winter once, which was an amazing experience. But you do solo trips in the backcountry for your photos, and apparently you see more that way than shooting from the road or a snow coach, or maybe you just like it better.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I see more. In fact, like I mentioned, I do my fair share of road photography. I've done both. And so I think I could judge appropriately. And I would say I see much less in the backcountry than I do from the road. Again, it comes down to how many opportunities, how much ground you're covering, I guess, and how many opportunities in that ground that you're covering do you have to photograph something. So in the backcountry, you're limited to snowshoes or skis. And I typically see a lot less back there than I do from the road. I love the solitude, and that's the main reason I go back there. And for me, a lot of what goes into a picture is not what comes out of the camera. It's the story that leads up to it, the experience that leads up to it. And for me personally, when it's just me one-on-one with that animal, it's a lot more special than if I'm, lined up with a bunch of other people, or,
Sure.
Standing on a road. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I do my fair share of that. It's just more special for me personally if I'm just immersed in the wilderness all around me, and it's just me and the animal.
Yeah, I can understand that. Going back to the blinds for a second, I wanted to ask you what kind of blind you would recommend for somebody just starting out.
So for starting out, they make some very functional and cost-effective pop-up style blinds. I've got one myself, and they work incredibly well for the cost that you're getting them for. You can find them for $40, $50 on Amazon or at your local sportsman store. and they compact very well. They don't weigh that much. They're about the size of a two-person tent, and they are very easy to set up. That's what I would recommend for somebody wanting to get into using blinds for photography is, the investment of $40 or $50, or even cheaper sometimes for a pop-up style blind is well worth what you can get out of it as far as images and experiences go.
Okay. So aside from what you do in the lower 48, you also fly into remote areas of Alaska for bears and other wildlife. So how do you stay safe out there by yourself, and how do you manage all the logistics of camping and photographing in a remote area?
So Alaska, and I touched on this a little bit before, but Alaska is, it's an amazing place. I love going out there. It's incredibly wild. And just like anywhere else, though, if it's Alaska or a local hiking trail, you just need to educate yourself before you go. And, I go out there primarily for bears, to photograph and spend time with bears. So before I ever went to Alaska, I spent a lot of time educating myself on bear behavior, signs to look for if they're getting nervous or agitated or aggressive, and what to do if they become aggressive, and just what to do on my part to keep myself and the animal safe. And education is just a huge part of it again. Also, a lot of it comes down to the gear that you're bringing. When I go up to Alaska, I know I'm going to have to bring my bear fence. I'm going to have to bring a food canister, bear resistant food canister. I'm going to have bear spray with me. I bring a satellite phone, all the appropriate maps for the area, everything like that, just to keep myself safe and be able to communicate with somebody when needed, or if needed. And the appropriate gear, education, it's all crucial when going out there. And another huge thing, especially for extended trips like that, I fly out there and I'll stay for quite a few days. Just checking in with my family regularly, leaving them a plan, saying, okay, this day I'm going to be here, and then 2 days later I'll be here, and just leaving them a very detailed plan, sticking to that plan as much as possible. And if that plan changes, letting them know. That way they're not alarmed that something's changing and I'm not where I said I would be. But as far as planning the logistics of that trip, it's pretty simple the way that I do it. I'll research before the area that I want to go to. And a lot of times that just entails looking at a map and picking a spot, honestly. And then I'll contact a bush pilot. They'll take me out, drop me off. And I just let them know, hey, I'm going to be in this location on this date at this time. That's when I need you to pick me up. And they'll come back out a week or two, later, whatever it ends up being. And again, if that plan changes, I always let them know, hey, I'll call you on this date, make sure everything's good for pickup. And if I'm not at that location, I'll give you the location where I am. That way they can pick me up.
Yeah, sounds good. So what does a bear fence consist of?
Bear fence, it's just some poles, kind of like tent poles. They're usually, I think they're fiberglass, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they're just poles that stand about 3 or 4 feet tall once you've got them in the ground. And it's very similar to like those little electric fences. I know a lot of ranchers use them to keep deer and other animals out of pasture for their cattle. It's very similar to that. But I don't even know what the material is. It's like
basically a hot wire.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. And there's 3 wires that go around the fence, and you set your gear up in the middle. And I've watched from a distance as bears approach my camp before, and just curious to see what they would do and if the fence would work. And they get close to that fence, and I don't know if they can sense the electricity running through it or what, but they don't touch it. And I've heard that when they do, it's usually with their nose, which is very sensitive part of the body, and it scares them enough to not come near it again. But it works incredibly well for me, and I just know to bring it when I'm in Alaska, because I've had experiences where I wish I had one and I didn't, and I'll always bring a fence after that. So
Yeah.
it's good to have.
So how do you keep it charged for when you're gone a week or two?
It's two what are they, D-cell batteries, I believe. That's all it takes. You
Oh,
put
really?
the batteries in, and the batteries, each pair, as long as there's not vegetation, touching the wires or something that dissipate the charge quicker.
Right.
If you've got it set up appropriately, I think they're rated for, it's like 14 to 16 days.
Oh, wow.
Don't quote me on that, but it's a fair amount of time. And I usually bring two sets of batteries that I can switch out about halfway through my trip, just in case.
Yeah.
Or if it's a longer trip, I'll bring more.
So you're taking freeze-dried food, I'm assuming, and
Yeah, I make my own. I make my own meals just because it's a lot cheaper than the stuff you buy at the store. And then I've got a dehydrator, and I just pre-portion the meals out and then dehydrate them and put them in little bags and take them out. And I can fit about 2 weeks of food in a bag about this big, about the size of a volleyball or something. And I can fit 2 weeks of food in there, and that's 3 meals a day plus snacks and dessert at the end of the day. So I make all my own meals and dehydrate it myself.
So you're really into the backpacking stuff.
Yeah, I love it. That's what I'm all about.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in one of your videos that you tried various camera systems and then ended up with Canon. So what does Canon do for you that the other systems didn't?
I love Canon. I feel like it's extremely user-friendly compared to some of the other systems. Just the customization ability for different buttons. I know all systems have that, but I've just found Canon to be the most user-friendly, in my opinion. And when I say user-friendliness, I mean being able to change the most settings with using like the maximum of two fingers. It's very easy and user-friendly in my mind. And also, where I do a lot of backcountry hiking and camping and backpacking for multiple days, I need batteries that are going to last a long time.
Sure.
So Sony, for instance, I used them when I first started getting into, I was doing landscape photography at the time when I first started getting into photography a little bit more. And I had a Sony, and I know things have changed, so it's not fair to judge the current cameras based on a camera I had 5 years ago. But at that time, when I was using Sony, the batteries would drain themselves so fast. And if I was in any sort of cold weather, they just wouldn't last more than literally a couple pictures sometimes. And then I would have to take them out and heat them up and then put them back in. So Canon batteries, I found, even in extreme cold, with a good condition battery, it does the job, and I don't have problems with them losing their charge drastically, like I have with other camera makers and whatnot. So for backcountry stuff that I do, I found that Canon really works well for me.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably fair to say that the battery technology has improved a lot over the last 5 years. And I have this, I shoot Nikon, and the Nikon batteries last me a long time too. So, and I think the Sony batteries have gotten better. I don't really know much
I've
about
heard they've gotten
selling.
better. Yeah, I've heard they've gotten better. So it's not fair to judge them based on a camera I owned 5 years ago.
Well, let's take a look at your photos. So I'll share my screen. And so this is a picture of two bears that are either fighting or mock fighting. I don't know the story, but it's the sort of picture that most people have of bears in their minds, I think, whereas the reality is they spend most of their time feeding on grass or salmon or whatever. So go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, so this was on my most recent trip to Alaska last year. And this was on, I think, my last evening out there. This family of bears is kind of special to me. I've actually photographed them 2 years in a row now. So I saw these guys just after they had been born, within a few months of coming out of the den and whatnot, when they were just little guys. And so it was just fun. I spent a lot of my last trip hiking and searching for this specific family once I had seen them the first time. And when I was out taking pictures of these guys, these cubs started to play. And yeah, like you said, they're mock fighting here. And the cub on the right was much more dominant and assertive than the cub on the left. And it was fun watching them. What I tried to capture when I took this image was, even though the cubs are in focus, I wanted to tell a story about mom. So you've got mom grazing back there, eating berries and whatnot. And I had to hustle around to try to get her between the two cubs, which was my goal. And you can tell she's tired. She's, just in her own zone, totally ignoring the cubs. And so I was really just trying to tell a story about parenthood and just show that mom's over it. No matter how much energy the cubs have, she's just kind of over it. And it was just a special, fun moment for me to watch these guys wrestle around for quite a while, actually.
So is the one on the right, the larger one, is that the same age as the other one, or?
They're the same age. And there was a third cub last year. I don't know what happened to it. It died sometime in the last year. But yeah, I'm assuming the one on the right is a male and the one on the left might be a female. I don't know. It's hard to tell at that young age. But yeah, they're the same age.
Wow. And I guess I've never seen them quite that different in size. So kind of surprising to me anyway. But it's a great photo. Yeah, I see what you were doing there. And it's a great example of what cubs tend to do, just like other kids, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. So these are two adult bears.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. These were big male bears that were out just wrestling around. This was pretty late at night in Alaska. It gets dark pretty late. So this was, I don't have the timestamp on it with me right now, but yeah, I was headed back to camp. This was a few years ago, and I noticed these two large male bears come up out of the river where I was camped in that area, and they started wrestling around. Again, just mock fighting out on this open flat area. So it was fun watching them. I've never seen bears so large, wrestling around before. And this was near the end. It was interesting because it looks very much like they're hugging here. And it was interesting because, they wrestled around for a bit, and then this was their last kind of little sparring match here. And then it almost looked like they hugged and then they separated and kind of went their own ways. So obviously I doubt that's what they were doing, but it looked very much like that. And so it was cool to see that and be able to capture that very, very brief moment.
Right. Yeah. Another great photo.
Thank you.
Well, sticking with the bear theme, this is with a bear and a salmon in its mouth, and the eggs are dropping out, and the salmon doesn't look like he's enjoying the experience too well.
Well, he only remembered it for a couple more seconds after this, but
Yeah.
this was a cool experience. This kind of goes back to knowing bear behavior. You don't approach these guys, but this was a cool experience because this bear actually approached me. And with bears, if they approach, you just stay very still, and for the most part, in most situations. And so he caught this fish and started approaching, and he got close enough where, yeah, I could get a picture zoomed in on the fish rather than the bear. And he didn't care that I was there. He just went up onto the land, onto the shore, and ate this female salmon. You can see the eggs kind of spilling out.
Right.
But this is a type of image that I've been working on trying to get for quite a few years now. So I was pretty thrilled when I was able to get it. And, you can see the water that the salmon's tail is splashing up and the detailed on the eye and the eggs and everything. So I just thought it was a fun image. And this is one of those images that I can truly say that years of work went into capturing this.
Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah, amazing detail, and not the typical bear image that you get when you go to Alaska. So
Yeah.
it's unique as well.
Thank you. So this was a really fun experience. This was a few years ago, out in Yellowstone area, and this was on one of my trips where I had gone back with snowshoes and skis, and I was just coming out. I hadn't seen it on that trip, and I was coming out, and I came across this fox, and the weather that day, a storm was starting to blow in, so it wasn't awful here, but within about 30 minutes, you could barely even see the fox because the storm had come in so quickly and it was so thick. But I really liked this image because you've got nothing else. It was just pure snow, and you've got, the back leg and the front leg both raised up, and you can see the other legs just punched in the snow a little bit, and you can see that the wind's starting to come in. It's starting to blow his fur around. But it was just a reminder for me of, when I look at it, I think back on that trip and how crazy the weather was, but how much fun I had. And this little guy kind of saved the trip because I really didn't see a whole lot with, a few days just out with my skis and snowshoes. And so this guy really just kind of saved the trip for me. And it was a fun time I had with him. I stayed with him through the storm up until the sun went down, and I got some other images after this of him literally being buried by the snow that came in, where all I could see was a pile of snow until he raised his head up, and then some of the snow fell off. So it's just a good reminder photo for me to remind me of that experience.
So I'm guessing this was in the Lamar Valley.
Yeah, just coming out of that area, I had skied back with a permit, and just coming out, I came across this guy.
Are these kit foxes?
These are desert kit foxes. This is, after wolves, these are my favorite species. So I've spent more time looking for kit foxes than I have any other species. And I spent a lot of time out in the desert looking for these guys. They've just always fascinated me. And so these were two kits that I was able to photograph about 4 years ago. And it was just a fun evening that I had with the family. The sun was setting. I really liked the side light on that kit on the right there, and the texture in the dirt right before them, and it's a fun ecosystem to be out in. A lot of people don't go out there just because it's so desolate and arid, but there's life out there if you spend the time looking for it. And these are the desert specialists, really. They're designed to live in those areas. So I'm fascinated by kit foxes, and I really liked this image when I took it. It's very basic portrait, but it just reminds me of my time spent out there with these beautiful foxes.
Yeah, that's a great photo. The one on the left has a nice gesture, and the one on the right's looking right at the camera,
Yeah.
or it's you. So was this from a blind or?
This was not. Kit foxes are a little bit different. I mean, I've photographed a lot of fox dens over the years, and I found that red foxes, for instance, in the backcountry, if they see somebody and they feel disturbed, they'll move their den, they'll move the kits and everything just because they feel threatened. Whereas kit foxes, I found that each family tends to be a little bit different. You get some families that are incredibly secretive, hard to photograph, and you get other families where I've had the parents come within just a couple feet of me to check out my camera, my tripod, different things like that. And they just don't care. And this was one of those families that just really didn't care that I was there. That being said, I still, kept my distance and respected their space and whatnot. But yeah, this was not from a blind.
Okay. Yeah, I've been impressed over the years that different animals of the same species have different personalities, and some of them, as you say, are very shy, and others are just curious, I guess.
Yeah, they sure are.
I think people that aren't involved with animals don't think of animals as having personalities, but I'm impressed that they do.
That's something I learned really quick with animals. Is a lot of people, would look at this and say, oh, those are kit foxes. That's a species. But when I look at this, or when I look at an animal, it's not just a species. Those are individuals, and you have to treat them as such because, like you say, their personalities are all different, and they're just like people. A lot of them, these foxes were funny because there were 4 kits that I would photograph, and I tend to name them. And there was one that I called the introvert because it didn't want to play with any of the others, and it just kind of secluded itself. It played by itself. It would find rocks or dirt clods and throw it up in the air. But anytime another fox came over to try to play with it, it would leave and go play by itself somewhere else. So I think that's something with wildlife that a lot of people miss, is they just see it as an overall species. They don't see them as individuals.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So there's another pair of, I think they're kit foxes again, right?
These are swift foxes,
Swift
so
foxes.
very similar.
Okay.
Yeah, they were considered the same species up until I believe it was the 90s. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, they were considered the same species. But yeah, these are swift foxes, and they are very similar. Their appearance is very similar. You'll notice their ears are smaller, and they're located more on the side of their head versus up above their eyes, kind of like the kit foxes. But yeah, swift foxes, they inhabit a very similar type of terrain. Those terrains can be very arid, but yeah, swift foxes tend to inhabit more of like a grassland type area, or sage steppe, different areas like that, where kit foxes stay primarily to just arid deserts. But this image was fun because, again, I was spending time with this family over the span of a few days. And I just like the anticipation that you can feel when you look at this image. I love an image that tells a story and lets you use your imagination when you look at it. I look at this and you can just imagine what happened, half a second after this picture was taken. The fox on the right totally got mauled by the one on the left. And you can just, kind of use your imagination of what happened next. So I love an image that allows you to be creative in your thinking when you look at it.
Yeah. Again, another great image. There's lots of detail on it. You can even see the individual hairs on the fox, and yet the background's nicely blurred. So well done.
Thank you very much.
So we'll switch gears again. So this is a greater sage grouse, I'm assuming.
Yep. Yeah, greater sage grouse. This species for me is very special. So like I had talked about before, when I was little, that's when my fascination for wildlife really started. And, I watched a lot of nature shows, PBS Nature, a lot of that stuff. And there was one program that I watched once that talked about greater sage grouse, and I must have been, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I remember thinking, oh, someday when I have a camera, that's going to be an animal that I go out and take pictures of. So this was the first animal that I actually thought to myself as a young kid, I want to go out and photograph those and see that display that they do. So this is a male, and what they do is they suck in up to a gallon of air in these air sacs that they have on their chest, and they make this strange, like bobbing, popping noise. It's a very unique display if you've ever seen it. And
yeah, I have.
They do this to assert their dominance over other males and to impress the females that come in. So this was taken from a blind. I set up just outside their display area. I didn't want to interrupt what they were doing. But this male, he actually, even though I was set up away from the birds, he came over and he displayed right in front of me, which allowed me to get this detailed image. You can see the details in those air sacs and the feathers and the color over the eyes. And it's an image of a sage grouse. I haven't seen really any others like this. So I was very happy with it. And again, I did this by using a blind and keeping a respectful distance from the birds. And he just happened to approach me.
Yeah. It's a great image and just great detail. You can see the blood vessels and the air sacs and everything. So, it's hard to get close to these without a blind, I would think. They're pretty skittish, at least the ones I've been around.
Yeah, they are. There's some good places, kind of like I mentioned earlier, there's some good places where you can actually pull up in a vehicle and photograph them pretty close. And that's something I would recommend anybody wanting to photograph grouse is start at locations like that. And you can get some really, really great close-up pictures of those locations if you're acting respectfully and not getting out of your car and, stuff like that.
Another grouse species, I guess. I don't know this one, but I'm sure you do.
Willow ptarmigans.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this image, it might be one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. It's a combination of landscape and wildlife.
Right.
And like I had mentioned before, a lot of the photography for me, it's not just what comes out of the camera, but it's the experience that goes into it. So this was fun. This was on a trip in Alaska. I was laying out in the tundra, looking specifically for these ptarmigan, and I found them. And so I laid down on the tundra away from them. And these birds can be extremely skittish, but this female with young approached me very closely, so close, in fact, that I couldn't focus on them for a time with my lens. They were within, 4 or 5 feet, and I couldn't focus on them. They were so close. And I was just laying down eye level with them on the tundra while they ate around me. And then they started to move off to my right a little bit. And I had my telephoto lens on, and I realized that, hey, I need to get my landscape lens on here because we've got this beautiful background with the clouds and the river and that fireweed there.
Right.
And so I got my landscape lens on real quick and was able to get more of the zoomed out approach. And I really like how it turned out personally. And again, just the experience to be literally surrounded by these birds as they fed just a couple feet away from me. It was just an amazing experience, especially given the fact that I was in such an amazing location too. It's an image that I really liked.
Yeah. Great environmental portrait, and got the rain clouds coming over the hills, and and the river in the background. Lots of good stuff there.
So this image to me, this is another one that represents literally years of work. And anytime I think about it, I just, I think of how fortunate I was to be able to have this sighting. So I had spent quite a bit of time scouting different areas. And this was a couple winters ago, and I was very fortunate that winter to have multiple mountain lion sightings, which is an animal that a lot of people may only catch a glimpse of or may never see. So I felt very fortunate to have multiple sightings that winter in multiple areas. And this was a younger cat that was going up a mountainside. And I knew he was in the area. I was hidden. I had made a natural photo blind out of the natural vegetation around me, and I had camo on beyond that. So the cat didn't know that I was there until I took that first picture. And then he looked right at me, even though he was a fair distance away. He heard my very quiet shudder, and he took off right after that. And I hate spooking animals like that. I thought I was far enough away with the silent shudder, but yeah, he took off, and this was one of the images that I was able to get. But for me, this is a species that just represents pure wilderness, because that's usually where you're going to run into them, is just middle of nowhere. And unless you live in Jackson Hole, apparently you'll see them right in town. But
okay, didn't know that. Yeah, it looks very relaxed, and I should point out that this wasn't taken in Patagonia. This was taken in the U.S., making it even more remarkable.
Yeah,
he looks very relaxed, just laying there looking at whatever.
Yeah, he was. And even after I took that picture, he knew something was up. And so he made his way up the rest of this little rocky cliff, went out on top, hid behind a tree for a minute, and was looking, and just to try to figure out what that weird noise was. And then he kind of slinked off, and I actually tracked him after that as well and found him again. It was just an amazing encounter, and one that I won't soon forget. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, let's talk about where people can find you. And you've got a lot of videos out there, which are great. And I don't know if you've got anything else cooking. You mentioned something about working on some videos. Is that anytime in the near future, or?
So yeah, I'm working on some longer documentary style videos right now, and I've got quite a few of them planned. And these are just myself. I'm not associated with National Geographic or anything like that. But these are just videos I'm putting out on myself on my YouTube channel. And yeah, these are more based on the wildlife and the cycles of life that they go throughout the year. and not so much as all the behind the scenes stuff that I generally put out, but I will have different behind the scenes videos on those as well. But yeah, I've got quite a few video projects that I'm working on right now, and I really enjoy putting those out. So yeah, you can find me on YouTube at just under Jimmy Breitenstein. Spelling's a little bit weird on that. But
good German name.
Yeah, strong German name. And yeah, so Jimmy Breitenstein on YouTube, and then Instagram, Jimmy B _ into the wild. And my website, which I'm in the middle of updating right now, so don't judge it too harshly, but my website is jimmybreitenstein.com.
Okay, and that's Breitstein, I believe.
Yeah, Breitenstein.
Yeah, realized that after I said it. Okay, well, thanks for being on, Jimmy. This has been a great experience. I've certainly enjoyed it. So we'll have to do this again sometime if you're up for it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to chat and talk about photography and awesomeness that comes with it. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Each episode of Photographing the West is published on the 15th and 30th of the month. The audio version is available on iTunes and many other RSS feeds. The video version is available on YouTube as Flanagan Photos. Both are available on my website at www.flanaganphotos, spelled FOTOS.com. Bye for now, and we'll be back on May 15th with Scott Weidensaul and his new book, A World on the Wing, The Global Odyssey of Migratory Birds. Not to be missed if you love photographing the birds. Bye.